In Russia, the arrows are turning toward Vladimir Putin, and this time they are coming from the people he has counted on the most.
Мы хотим живыми мужей вернуть. Нам не нужно, никакие выплаты нам не нужны после этого.
For years, the Kremlin could dismiss anger as foreign pressure, opposition noise, or online outrage. Now the tension is surfacing in kitchens and courtyards, and in the center of Moscow, where a single demand cuts through the slogans, "Give us back our husbands," "Stop your war." It is not a party message. It is a family message, and it is growing louder. The faces behind that shift are overwhelmingly female, Russian wives, mothers, and grandmothers who once treated loyalty as routine. Their anger is not ideological. It comes from what they hear from the front and what they see happening to the men in their families. About 6,000 leaked complaint documents, reported by the New York Times last week, describe a reality many say they can no longer explain away. In those pages, the army looks less like a disciplined institution and more like a system that pulls in whoever it can reach. The complaints include accounts of cancer patients, people diagnosed with schizophrenia, and men with severe disabilities, including amputations and wheelchairs, being pushed toward combat roles under claims of recovery or fitness. One mother, writing to a Human Rights Commission, says her son was restrained for 4 days without food or water. The language is blunt, as if the family is forced to prove that the state is still dealing with human beings. To their relatives, these men are fathers, brothers, and sons. To commanders, families say they are entries on a roster. Those who can pay for safer assignments reportedly stay behind. Those without money are sent forward, sometimes into the most dangerous zones. A woman who says she lived through the Chechen war sums up her conclusion in a single line. She knows what war is, but this feels like something else. In her view, this is no longer an army. Many families now describe the structure as closer to a predatory network than a professional chain of command. The financial pressure at the front helps explain why. One of the clearest examples comes from a video message recorded by an 18-year-old soldier and sent to his mother. Crying, he claims his commanders demanded a $15,000 bribe and threatened to zero him out if he could not pay, a phrase used to imply being sent into a situation he would not survive. He is now missing. His mother wants a formal investigation, but she says the state shows no urgency. That silence raises an obvious question. Why does the system respond so weakly when families demand answers? Before returning to that, there is a contrasting image from the other side of the war. While some Russian mothers try to hide their sons from conscription, a 95-year-old woman in Ukraine, Mrs. Sofia Dukovich, in the village of Klo, spends her nights knitting. Her hands shake, but she keeps working until morning. She says she does not sleep. She makes socks so soldiers' feet stay warm. Over 3 years, she has knitted more than 270 pairs, and she says she will continue as long as she can breathe. Back in Russia, independent reporting points to a bureaucratic wall built into state systems. The outlet Important Stories has described how electronic population registration tools can erase or conceal soldiers' data under state security logic. When spouses try to access their husband's information to apply for assistance, they sometimes face a blank screen, as if the person never existed. In one account, a woman says her husband's identifying information disappeared in ways that even affected records tied to their marriage, blocking her ability to claim legal rights. The message families take from this is harsh. Soldiers can be celebrated as heroes when they are sent to the front, then treated as unknown persons when their families ask for pay, documents, or benefits. For many, it feels like a second betrayal, because it reaches into the home and turns sacrifice into denial. Public opinion, even in an authoritarian environment, reflects growing pessimism over nationalist enthusiasm. Levada Center data shows a significant rise to 55% in strong opposition to a relative signing an army contract, particularly among women, younger people, and rural residents who bear much of the war's cost. The focus has shifted from victory to survival. Even closed polling, described as coming from Kremlin-linked sources, has reportedly shown broad fatigue. In that picture, people are less interested in dreams of a new world order than in a husband returning home, or a son staying alive. And at this point, Putin's response has been to widen the draft. Russia's largest autumn conscription drive since 2016 has been framed as routine, but its scale and timing have drawn attention. Beginning October 1st, 2025, 135,000 young men are to be drafted in stages. What makes this round different is the mechanism. The Kremlin has activated an electronic draft system that turns conscription into a digital trap. A paper notice is no longer required. A notification on a government portal can trigger consequences that reshape a person's life. Under the rules described, whether someone opens the message or not, the system can treat it as delivered. If a person fails to report within 20 days, penalties can include losing a driver's license, frozen bank accounts, and restrictions on selling property. Most importantly, the border can be closed. Critics argue this is digital coercion used to fill frontline shortages by tightening control at home. Facing the environment, many soldiers desert. Desertion, previously taboo in official messages, is now frequently reported. Data from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense's main intelligence directorate on October 18th claims that 25,000 Russian soldiers and officers deserted from the central military district between November 2024 and July 2025, a number significant enough to impact operations. These departures are described not as missed leave, but as direct flight from positions near the front. The same intelligence reporting claims that in over 30 cases during 2024 to 2025, soldiers deserted with weapons and even heavy equipment. In other words, the army is not only losing people, it is losing the tools assigned to them. One reason cited for this breakdown is the return of entrenched abuse inside barracks culture, known as dedovshchina, meaning humiliation and bullying. In captured internal reports referenced in coverage, deaths are not always listed as combat-related. Some are described with cold administrative codes, including failure to carry out orders. The fear for many soldiers is simple. They may die from enemy fire, or they may die because their own side decides they are disposable. For those who cannot escape, surrender becomes a rational option. Ukraine's I Want to Live project has released figures presented as a window into prisoner numbers kept opaque since the invasion began. According to that project, more than 70,000 Russian soldiers have been taken prisoner since the start of the full-scale war. The striking claim is the pace. It says the number taken prisoner in 2025 exceeded the combined total of 2022 and 2023, a sign that morale, not just manpower, is cracking. Inside prisoner camps, another detail is increasingly common. Alongside Slavic faces, there are detainees from Nepal, Africa, and Cuba. The claim is that Russia depleted its own youth so quickly that it turned to foreign recruits and mercenaries to fill gaps. According to the same figures, 7% of Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine are foreign nationals from 40 countries, with an average of 2 to 3 foreign fighters taken prisoner each week. Pressure does not stay on the battlefield. It spreads into civilian life, especially when protest carries a high price. A widely discussed example is 33-year-old artist Sasha Skoshilenko. Reports say she did not organize a rally or attack anyone. She replaced supermarket price tags with small notes describing facts about Russia's attacks on Ukraine. The state's response, a 7-year prison sentence, is meant to signal that even small disobedience can be punished as treason. Repression has not ended resistance. It has pushed it underground, made it quieter, more symbolic, and harder to label. Politico's analysis, described under the title The Invisible Force, outlines a form of opposition that blends mourning, symbolism, and slow disruption, rather than open confrontation. The Put Domoy movement, comprised of soldiers' wives and mothers, leads the first layer of visible mourning. They act as grieving relatives, not political organizers, wearing white headscarves reminiscent of Argentina's disappeared mothers. Their acts, like laying flowers at memorials, appear as honoring heroes legally, but politically demand, "You took our men, now return them." When authorities began suppressing even these gestures, some shifted to the empty pot action, opening windows and banging pots and pans, a protest tradition used elsewhere. It is hard to arrest, and it points directly to inflation and household strain, the sound of kitchens under pressure. A second layer is soft symbolism. A women-led current described as soft power has been associated with signals that are hard to prosecute, bracelets in Ukraine's colors, pacifist symbols, and clothing that hides no war messaging inside ordinary designs. Each act is small, but together they create a visible language of refusal. The third layer is bureaucratic sabotage, deliberately slowing the war machine. Workers protest by using legal sick leave to cut output without breaking rules. Office sympathizers delay or misfile paperwork, stalling processes. As Ekaterina stated in Politico, this drains officials' resources and exposes the system's inefficiency. Behind this resistance sits a demographic reality that makes the pressure heavier. When Putin took power in 1999, he promised to reverse Russia's population decline. A quarter century later, Rosstat data indicate only 1.22 million babies were born in Russia in 2024, close to the historic low recorded in 1999. In practical terms, years of oil revenue and imperial ambition did not produce demographic recovery. Today's crisis is described as worse than the 1990s for a clear reason. Back then, Russia had an immigration buffer. After the Soviet Union collapsed, millions from Central Asia moved to Russia, filling labor gaps. Now that buffer is weakening. Russia is increasingly a country people leave, heading to Europe, Gulf states, or Turkey, often seeking stability and distance from mobilization. The strain shows up in labor shortages. Reports describe 70% of Russian companies struggling to find workers, with the construction slowing and factories operating below capacity. At the same time, the country is experiencing major brain drain. Estimates cited here put the figure at 650,000 young, educated professionals leaving in the last 2 years, including engineers, doctors, and software developers. Meanwhile, the war consumes men in their most productive years. Data cited from Mediazona and the BBC Russian service claims at least 1 million Russian soldiers have been killed. These were the age group most likely to build families. Each loss reduces both the present workforce and the future population. And those who return may carry severe trauma and addiction issues, feeding social breakdown rather than recovery. Critics argue the Kremlin's answer has been demographic panic, not careful family policy. Officials discuss banning the ideology of childlessness and reviving a Soviet-style childlessness tax while money flows towards the war. But pressure does not create trust, and trust is what families need to raise children. A United Nations projection often cited in worst-case terms suggests that if migration drops towards zero while these trends continue, Russia's population could fall from 145 million to 57 million by 2100. It points to a wider risk, not only a shrinking state, but long-term erosion of national stability. The question now is whether this growing, largely female-led resistance, mourners in public, symbols in plain sight, and quiet sabotage inside offices can bend a system built to absorb dissent. The Kremlin remains powerful, but the pressure is no longer coming from the margins, it is coming from families, and once that shift takes hold, it does not fade easily.